All right. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Redwood Financial Strategies Education Time. I have with us here Nathan Dosch. He is specializing in mergers and acquisitions. He talks a lot about buying and selling businesses. He's with the Convergence Planning Group. So, wanted to kind of pass it over to him and talk to you guys a little bit about what you could expect in that process.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, like he said, my name
Yeah.
is Nate Dosch. I've been an attorney, practicing attorney for going on 20 years. I also have a master's degree in tax. I've worked in public accounting in a couple of law firms, helping a lot of small, medium-sized business owners with everything from day-to-day transactional stuff, but largely focused on the buying and selling and ultimately transition of the business. We used to think of those things in a family-owned context as succession planning, which kind of changed that term of art to transition planning because we see
Mm.
fewer and fewer second, third generation businesses with just mom and dad started something, grew it, did a great job. Sons and daughters went off and got an education and they chose their own career path. So maybe they're not as interested in taking over that family business. So it's not a succession, it's more of a transition. So we'll
Mm.
talk a little bit about that on both sides. We've got new people. You've been running a company for a long, long time, or even a short time, but now you're thinking about what do I want to do when I grow up, and what does that look like? So I, there's some soft stuff to it. We'll talk at a very high level about some details, but that is not intentionally sarcastic or glib. It is an important question that I ask on the sell side for people. That's one thing I would like people to give some serious thought to is what are you going to do after you're not working 90 hours a week or this isn't consuming every waking moment of your time? Or do you have good hobbies? Do you get along with your spouse? Do you have things that you can
Yeah.
do to keep occupied? It's things like that that maybe we don't think about. They're hard questions and they're awkward questions to ask, right? But when you go from being
Yep.
on 100% of the time to now being like, what am I gonna? Those things have to check out because you'll get bored real quick. You can only fish, hunt, and golf so much. I've learned.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that
It sounds cool to sit on a beach every day of the week, yet that's fun
yeah,
for
for
about
sure.
3 days for most of us.
When you're generally speaking, I might stereotype, and not everybody fits this, but generally speaking, the leaders, the presidents, the CEOs, the people that have started and built businesses have strong Type A personalities. They're used to doing and building, and they're generally okay with that risk, but they want to be in control of it at the same time. And so looking out at what am I going to do? How am I going to fill my time? And ultimately, the big question is, do I have enough at that point? And that's where guys like you, Jay, come in, right? Like looking at it. And my big question on the sell side, a lot of the time when clients come to me is, what's my business worth? Right. And I reframe that question because that we can figure out. But the real question is, what do you need it to be worth? That's how it ties into
Yeah.
financial planning and
Mhm.
what amount do I need in order for this to transition and for me to no longer be a business owner and transition into that investor, passive investor role for the most part. They're very different questions. Sometimes when they align, it's great, right? Like if we can look at our financials and get to the right valuation number from a pure valuation standpoint, and that lines up with, all right, my financial
Mhm.
plan over here, it says I need X and I can get X. Great, that's perfect. But if there's a disconnect there, that's an obstacle that we have to overcome. Because many times we're running our businesses that sustains our life. We either take a salary or we have
Yeah.
distributions. That's our cash flow from a financial planning standpoint. And when you now have a pot of money that needs to be invested, that has to produce and replace that cash flow.
Hmm.
From a planning perspective. So those are sorts of the things at a high level that we have to start the conversation about, not necessarily how much is it worth, but what do I need it to be worth? And let's tie those two things together. You have so those are good planning points. One is more of an emotional, psychological deal. The other is more numeric, more quantitative, where we can actually do that analysis from both sides, which I think is great. One thing for business
Mm.
owners to be prepared for is the earlier that we can start these conversations, whether it be what am I going to do when I grow up, or what do I need when I am growing up, time you can build into the process of doing stuff, the better it will be at the end. There's nothing worse than a forced sale situation. And we all know that just from day-to-day operations. If you have to sell me your house, Jake, then I don't have to pay top dollar for it, right? Because you need me to do it. You need it,
Hmm.
and I want it. So you have a disconnect of the interest there. So the further you can get out in front of the urgency and plan for it, uh, better value that you can recognize, and also just making that process as smooth as possible, because the sales side process is stressful. It's invasive when you have people asking about your financial statements, your tax returns, how you run your
Hmm.
business successfully for a long time. That is a big barrier for a lot of people that are running a closely held company, because they feel
Yeah.
it's
What
just
what
hard.
about their fear of employees finding out, or the general public finding out that they might be for sale or looking to buy?
Yep,
Um,
that's a
that's
huge
got to fall
challenge
under that
too.
too, I guess.
Yep, 100%. And from a procedural standpoint, you've got legal documentation that can help with that a little bit. Oftentimes, when we engage
Hmm.
on either side of a transaction, the
Hmm.
first step, whether you're working through a business broker or your legal counsel or whoever's advising you in those transactions, one of the first steps will be what's called a non-disclosure agreement, signed by the parties. And in essence, it's this confidentiality agreement. It says, I'm going to share a bunch of stuff with you. I'm going to learn a bunch of stuff about you. We promise to play nice in the sandbox and not, send this out to the general public. So you have some legal terms to that. The next stage, if we get through that, we share a little bit of documentation. We feel like, all right, the financials check out. We're still interested. Many times, in at least here in Wisconsin, and it's kind of changing a little bit. The next step in that process would be a letter of intent if the buyer is interested. So again, a letter of intent takes it the next step, and it says, hey, I like your company. I'll give you $1 million. Kind of some things that I'm thinking. It breaks down. This amount maybe seller finance, a paper via a promissory note.
Hmm.
Those are typical process driven things. I will say, and I caution my clients all the time, that gives formality to what we're talking about. It's a big step for people, but it's really, and I say that for
Okay.
one very important. It gives some structure, but it's a non-binding letter of intent. That means it's
Hmm.
worth the paper that it's written on, typically in an LOI. One is, if it's included, an exclusivity provision. So if I really want to buy your company and you sign that LOI, you agree not to negotiate with other people for the sale of your company. Now I have a limit, like me and you are just negotiating. And the second enforceable provision is the confidentiality provision. It says you can't tell people other stuff about us. But well, your question was more on point with, like, we don't, so that helps with the general public, right? Everybody outside these walls. But the other side of it is, I want to keep and I want to keep happy.
Hmm.
I don't want you talking to them. And that's a big part of an acquisition, is we want to keep those key people, right? But if we start on
Yep.
day one of a 90-day due diligence period, if I'm the seller, I'm keeping them away from my employees for most of that time. Maybe that those conversations and that news comes out in the weeks or days leading up to the closing, because it's
Hmm.
really sensitive. If that gets out, then now we have a potential problem on our hands. If they're just used to working for the founders or the family that's running the business, and now they
Hmm.
hear Nate Dosch is
Yeah, they
coming
get a
into
little
town,
spooked.
they can get spooked and start looking. Um, and part of
Yeah.
the value of the company is our human capital a lot of the time, depending on,
Hmm.
in all cases, it's hard finding people. And it's certainly hard finding people with that legacy knowledge that made us
Hmm.
great at what we do, or made us desirable from a sales. So it's hard to navigate. It has a lot of moving parts to it, and it's hugely important that buyers and sellers work together on that to navigate when the timing is right, when that news should be delivered, the messaging that goes out. Because a lot of times when you're buying a small business, you're buying that it's a big goodwill. The goodwill is a big part of that transaction,
Hmm.
right? You're buying
Yep.
work in the community, and that comes from
Hmm.
our good people, our name, and we want to keep that, because if we soil that at all, then the value of the whole enterprise goes down.
Hmm. Yeah.
So managing that stuff is huge. The pre-selling and the planning stuff that I think is huge, is really, really important on the sales, maintaining and making sure your financials are accurate, credible, defensible. One of the main things I see a lot of the times with small business owners is they're almost, and not that this isn't a criticism, it just doesn't help with a sale. So don't get me wrong, they're creative in their accounting to lead to
Mm-hmm.
a beneficial tax result at the end of the day. There might be personal items that are run through the business and it hits your financial statements. Well, generally speaking, that's not good for selling because we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
maximize our EBITDA and our sellers' discretionary earnings. So cleaning up those financials, making sure the golf membership's not on there when it's really a personal asset, or if there's a bunch of vehicles, if we're paying for cell phones and health insurance and cars for everybody under the sun in our family unit, getting some of those
Mm-hmm.
things up. Because generally the valuation methodology will take and calculate your net income and then do some add backs. But that's where the real rubber meets the road because we want to get to an EBITDA number or a seller's discretionary earnings number, and then that's applied, and then we apply a multiple to that to get a purchase price or a justifiable purchase price. So if we're minimizing, we show income, and we have to add back a bunch of stuff. That's going to be an area where people can, kind of butt heads. The higher that number is, it's okay to pay taxes in
Mm-hmm.
that context. It's great to have super clean financial statements. It'll just make both that what's my business worth conversation and what do I need it to be worth. That'll help those things align much better at the end of the day. And that's
Mm-hmm.
stuff people are working on now, ahead of time, even if their
Okay.
sales budget
Yeah.
perspective.
Well, I can see how planning this out early so that they have the time to get the statements in order, figure out the stuff with the buyers. I mean, I think, and it's just my 2 cents of what I see out there and my knowledge. It's like a lot of people will wait until a health event or something makes them sell,
Yeah.
and then like you said, there's so many fire sales,
Hmm.
and it's people can get out ahead of it and they work with professionals like yourself who are knowledge in this stuff. It's like these conversations can save thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a sale and taxes and all of this stuff, and just headaches in general because none of us like headaches.
No, and I know being in the roles that I've been in, it's not always the most pleasant thing to be like, "Ah, I got to talk to my attorney today, or I have to talk to my tax professional today." Having trusted and I get that, and I don't take it offensively. I'm like, I don't like going to the dentist
No, me
that much,
neither.
so it's totally fine. I just it is worth it, and you can quantify the value in having really good trusted advisors around, including an
Hmm.
investment professional and financial planner. And those are some of the things that we're easily like, well, I'll do that later. I'll do that. Yeah, I don't have
Hmm.
because we're busy. We're running a business. We're head chef and chief bottle washer of running, whatever size successful business that we have, and so we push those
Hmm.
things to the back. But getting those
Yeah.
people engaged and in your corner early with whether it be, my son or daughter is interested, laying out the groundwork for what that might look like. It's in many
Hmm.
cases today, our business owners can't do the old school gifting down to the next generation because they need some
Hmm.
liquidity. They need a liquidation
Yep.
event. So
Yeah.
somebody
Why would
needs
I
to
put
have
in the stock market when I can put in my business, right?
it's paying. It pays. I can control
Hmm.
it. It's got a
Yep.
better investment. And I
Hmm.
know it.
Hmm.
So yeah, 100%. So but having those conversations about what that might look like. Sometimes we don't have family, we don't have an outside market, so we have to look internally to key employee time to be able to prep that out. Uh, as in many cases, you don't have employees that have bags of cash sitting around to be able to pay you, and let you get out. So that you have to get it, you have to get out
Hmm.
in front of those conversations. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Well, I feel like we could have another conversation and maybe another education piece, kind of diving into those a little bit. I think people would want to hear your take, maybe on another one here on involving a bank and just diving in a little bit more on what you said about trying to figure out how do we actually sell this thing too. Like, what are some ways they could get creative or think or just the right questions to ask, right? Like, I think that's a big thing. A lot of people just don't even know what questions to ask. It's like I'm confused
yeah,
on something, but I don't know how to ask.
yeah, and I often look at it in a lot of the things that I do. We get overwhelmed when we see the forest and not the trees. Like it just looks like
Hmm.
one big blob of I don't know what the heck to do. But once you start to sit down and develop those plans and you tackle each individual tree and you start to address those, starts to make a lot more sense. And you can cut down a tree here or cut down a tree forest. It's
Yeah.
not so intimidating. It's just the where do I start is debilitating
Mhm.
for most people
Yep.
because it's like I've never done this before. I'm just used to making my products or providing my services, and I can do that great, but I don't know what, I just don't even know. And then we've got the internet now. People can go on there and pop on really good information, but it's the same
Mhm.
challenge. It's like a fire hose of information, and
Way too
90% of
much.
it is it's just too much. How do you filter that? So
Mhm. Right. Too much work. I'm good where I'm at.
right.
I'm just gonna push it. I'm just gonna kick the can down another year and
Yeah, we'll
see how
deal
it
with it
goes.
later. And
Right.
then, in 6 months, you've got one of the concern or a family issue or the business
Mhm.
ebbing and flowing. I think that's another one I would put in there on the sell side that people maybe their financials don't look great at the current time, and they'll say, well, let's just wait till they improve. Well, there's a
Mhm.
lot of things that factor into
Oh
that.
yeah.
One is the market that we're in. If you think of where we're at from an interest rate perspective, and I don't want to launch too much into the bank conversation that you were having, but in the last 2.5 to 3 years, from an interest rate
Oh yeah.
perspective, that impacts value because the cost of cash goes up. So therefore,
Hmm.
the cash flow has to be that much better, and the value comes down and it comes down a lot of the times by way of that multiple that I talked about that we apply to an EBITDA. So you could improve your EBITDA, just to use a crude example. Say you were at 100,000 of EBITDA and you're like, let's wait till we get that up to like 200. Well, maybe at the time you're 100, maybe the multiple is 5x. So you could maybe sell your business for $500,000. Well, if you get to 150 or 200 of EBITDA, but now the interest rates have gone up and the multiple's at 3, now maybe you're still at 500 of value, you're at 600 of
Mhm.
value, depending on you see what I mean? Like we went
Yeah.
up great, our financial condition is great, but the market doesn't allow us to recognize that anymore because everything else in the world changed. Cost of
Mhm.
capital changed, the multiples went down, our industry's kind of matured to a point that it's not as desirable. Any of those things can change overnight. So
Mhm.
I'm not forcing a sale for
Yeah.
anybody. It has to still be right based on the emotional that's going on. But when we say let's just wait until we're in a better position, maybe
Mhm.
not. I don't know if we are. Sometimes the best time to do anything is when somebody knocks on your door telling you they're going to write you a check. I don't know.
Yeah.
It happens. It
Yeah.
still does.
Mhm. Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, this has been great stuff. I think this is it's a topic we could probably dive into a little bit deeper too, and might have to have you back on one. I'm sure we're going to get some follow-up questions on things too, but at least to get the wheels spinning for people. So, all the viewers, anyone have questions or anything, reach out. Either one of us, you can find us online. We're all pretty easy to find. Ask questions. Shoot me an email if you want to get in contact with Nate, and best of luck with going into Q2 here and make it a good summer for everybody. All right. Well, everybody, you take care, and thanks for stopping by with Redwood here, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jake.